writing was very new to me, writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
I had been sort of writing poetry stuff, and that, but I'd never written a book, and that's a big project. I mean, you know all about that, both of you. But so I avidly read stuff that would help me. For example, I read the letters that C.S. Lewis wrote to children. He had a huge correspondence, and he answered everybody that wrote to him, even children. And some of them asked him about how to write, and they sent him samples of their stories and everything. And he treated each of them with such respect, and he gave them his advice on how they could write well. And I read these things because he is such a brilliant writer, and some of his stuff is really hard to understand, but he was writing for children. And I got all these hints about how you write. And I also read Dorothy L. Sayers. I don't know if she's an older Victorian writer, but she wrote a lot of detective stories. But she wrote a book called The Mind of the Maker, in which she actually talks about her writing process. So it was like I was getting an education as I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I am so grateful for that experience, because I think it's helped in the speaking. It's helped to really focus on the stories I want to tell when I'm speaking. It's equipped me in a way. The exercise of writing the book is kind of bearing fruit in the speaking.
Yeah. I think I was particularly struck by when you talked on Zoom the last time. Particularly struck by the way you'd gone in search of your roots and in search of your own history and what happened to your parents and your family. That for you it wasn't about telling a set story over and over again or developing a set story. That you were constantly reimagining, and you're constantly recreating and putting pieces together. That your life was a voyage of discovery. I think that's what's come so clear, and that discovery was important as part of your healing process. Would that be true? Would you see your writing as a voyage of discovery?
I think everything you just said is really true. And, as you were speaking, I was thinking, I think some of it is my personality, because I love new things and discovering, even just now we're on lockdown, George and I try and go out in the car and look for some new places that we haven't been to. And that's a similarity of my personality. But I think the healing that I've experienced, which I described on the Zoom call, that was very significant and has continued, has freed me up into who I really am, and to do those things, and I love, even now, finding out new things and new connections. And for example, on the Zoom call, it was enormously joyful for me to discover that my friend Shirley, that I mentioned in the book, we were both teachers in this village in Slinfold, Sussex, and we both experienced this time of healing together. And we've kept correspondence. She's still living in England. She actually was on the Zoom call. And, that is a huge deal. She lives on her own. She's similar age to me. And I think it was the first time she'd ever done a Zoom call. So imagine what that took. And so you see, the thing is living. It's like we have this deep connection, both teachers, and we both experience this healing. And here we are, all these years later, and it's something's still happening,
Absolutely. You've spoken about, reflecting on the Zoom call. I just wonder, what are your reflections?
I think I'm still processing it.
Mm-hmm.
What are my reflections? One of them is, I think, wow, I really have a horrible squeaky voice. But I kind of marvel at the setup, because I think, Amy, you have an amazing capacity to make everybody feel at home. So here's this strange experience of a Zoom call. We're all isolated in our little places in all these different countries, but we have the feeling of being together. And we were such a diverse group of people. I marvel at that. That here's this guy who's doing his PhD asking these really deep questions. And then there's Bill. And I was kind of really nervous because I thought, wow, he's a professor and he knows all this stuff. And I feel so uneducated and everything. And Amy reassured me that you were very friendly. And I just felt, my impression at the Zoom call is I felt I was among friends. It was very warm and safe. It was, here's the possibility of this public thing, but we felt safe together in talking about these things. It was an amazing experience.
I think it was for everybody, wasn't it? It was,
yeah.
It was just phenomenal. It was lovely to see, one of the things that, even what was happening before the Zoom was it was just amazing to see the emails that I received, how everybody wanted to tell me how they were connected to you. Just absolutely gorgeous stories, about like years of friendship, and then some people like students like Imran, who was like, I really want to know about Hannah's story. I'm writing my PhD. It features the kinder transport, and Andy afterwards as well, reflecting upon, listening to your story and how, he can talk about that in the classroom now. It was really overwhelming, and I think it was 7 countries that people were Zooming from.
Yeah,
it was wonderful to know that you're part of a big family, and especially it must feel like that for you, having friends all over the world, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was wonderful. What was you going to say, Bill?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it was a great experience for me too, and I think it gave. I mean, I know I thought, and I was telling Amy about this afterwards. I think an awful lot about reconciliation and conciliation after you talked. It did not. It is. I mean, it's a subject obviously I deal with to a degree in my own research, but I'd not thought about it enough. I think I'd not thought about it enough at a personal level, because it's clearly very important in your story, and perhaps I've not thought about it at a broader level enough either. So I learned from that. I really did, and I also find it incredibly moving. And the story you just told about Marcus reacted exactly the same way. It's an astonishing story, and it's so hopeful. It's so full of hope. And gives the chance to move on. I mean, I've been reading a book about how Germans are affected even into the 3rd generation by the war, one way or the other. And a lot of that also is guilt. It's still this burden of guilt. And to see what you did and what you achieved with Marcus is so incredible and so touching. And it shows it's possible. And I think that's what I took from that. And it was just fantastic.
Wow. I think, one thing is that I think another thing that has been very wholesome to me is that, this is not the only thing in my life. Yeah. This is not my absolute only identity. And I think that can be a danger, that we take on this identity and we close off the rest of life. And, I'm very thankful to my husband for the things he's engaged in. And the reason this comes to mind is because you used the word reconciliation. And you see, George has been involved in reconciliation of other things. And, a large part of our life for the last 7 years was involved with the historical issues of hatred and past wrongs that were committed between different Christian streams. I mean, in Germany, the whole thing of the Catholics and the Protestants, and it was all centered on the Martin Luther anniversary. And we had international friends who came together preparing for that, not in a kind of triumphant sense, celebration, respect, yes, but grieving all the wrongs, the killings and the awful things that happened between Catholics and Protestants. And we've been part of Catholic leaders and Protestant leaders going to Wittenberg and confessing these things. So I think that also helps me a lot to have this kind of balance and be not over focused on only one thing, and look at life beyond, the fuller aspect of what's going on.
Yeah.
I wonder, you spoke a couple of times about in your testimony, handing this particular experience or event or handing it to Jesus, and that separation between that and the grieving that you're doing, but also like the wider sense of what was going on. And I just wondered how faith comes into your testimony, because it's so incredibly moving when you talk about it, and this whole process of forgiveness and healing, and it really connects spiritually, but also emotionally, personally, nationally. But it's so interesting, your spiritual connection and your Christianity. I'd really like to know more about how that helps you talk about your experiences, but also how that influences, on your testimony.
I think you're talking really about core, the heart, the center.
Yeah.
For me, of everything. And you see, when I was writing the book and when I speak, I have strong sense that it isn't just me. I'm not just doing my thing. I really invite God to lead the process. And, this reference I made to Dorothy L. Sayers, she talks about the 3 aspects of creativity. And the first one is the idea. And I see, she writes about actually God being the creator and the originator. So I'm actually looking beyond the writing of the book and Gerda's invitation, and beyond the invitation, for instance, to go and share my testimony in lots before these international group. I'm looking beyond the person who's inviting me, and I kind of feel that God is the originator of that. And that doesn't put me on a high place. I mean, it makes me very low and humble. But you see, it frees me from the full responsibility of it. I need to be responsible and tell the truth, but it's not just up to me. So I would say that's what gave me the courage to write. It gave me the courage to go to Chumno. And the 10 of us who went to Chumno, Rachel, who you met, we all have that same connection. And the people who went to Wittenberg, there was a retired Catholic bishop, and there was the head of the Lutheran renewal movement in Germany, German. But all of them were kind of in submission to this trust in God. And they, for each of us, Jesus is actually alive. It's not kind of a religious symbol or a practice or something we do. It's actually a living experience. And so I would say the question you're asking is actually the heart of the matter, for me. And it's the source of my healing.
Yeah.
I would also say it is also the source of controversy. Because for many Jews, that is actually a betrayal. One person who read my book at the beginning put a review on Amazon, and he was so angry at the fact that, I followed Jesus as my Messiah, because he felt that was a betrayal of my parents. So that is also an aspect of this. That's on the one hand, but in the world today, in Germany, in Israel, in America, many places, there are whole groups of Jews who are actually followers of Jesus. They call themselves Messianic Jews.
I think me after the talk, we, Bill and I, really reflected on this particular aspect, and I think it's something that we really, as researchers, really need to think about more. And I think it's it's so emotional, it's so personal, it's something that you may not understand as a researcher, maybe because of, you have a different faith or you're not religious. Also, we'll never fully understand, because obviously it is so personal and people are motivated in so many ways, and people's religious connections are so at the core of them, and speak to them in so many different ways that, I understand exactly what you've just said there, but I'll never really feel that, you know what I mean? Because obviously it's your experience. But I think we were really having a talk about this afterwards, because it's something that really spoke to both of us, didn't it?
It did, definitely. And I think particularly because I've obviously, read accounts by survivors who lost their faith and who never refound it, but also because this connection to conciliation and forgiveness, which I think springs to a large extent from your faith, from your beliefs, and there's a big connection between that. And the way you're able to approach Germany today, for instance. But I was wondering too about, I think I read in your book about Billy Graham. Did I remember that correctly? And I wondered about a kind of watershed moment, or was that? I mean, was it like that? Was it a kind of a sudden insight, or did it develop more slowly than that? When I read about the Billy Graham episode, it sounded a bit like a moment where you felt your eyes had been opened, but perhaps I didn't read that entirely rightly. Was it more gradual? Was it a more gradual process?
I think it was both. I think it was a crisis. It was a crisis because my struggles internally were so great. They were unbearable at that point.
Mm.
And I had suppressed them. I was a wounded person and trying very hard. And I was coming to the end.
Mm.
And so it was a crisis. But I think it was a crisis moment, but it was the beginning. I think there was a lot of healing that needed to be done after that. I think there still is.
Mm.
But that was like the first door that opened. There are a lot of doors that after that. And I have found other places where I have experienced healing. But, George and I actually watched a couple of old movies of Billy Graham. And, there was something very special. There was something very pure and wholesome, and it rang true with what he said. And it was certainly, a very big moment for me. But it was by no means, it was all done. It was just an introduction to this.
Yeah. Well, was it in Coventry that you heard it? I'm trying to remember. Was it?
It was actually Shirley and I, this lady I was talking about, we were teaching in a small village school in Slinfolds, West Sussex.
Oh, okay.
And we lived in Horsham, and it was a radio relay all over the country. And the Church of England in Horsham put on this radio relay.
Okay.
And and it was amazing. The church was packed, it was a big thing to do, even though it was just a radio relay. I think Britain was really enamored of Billy Graham at that time,
Incredible. It's really important to learn about faith. And as Amy says, this may be something we as researchers don't think enough about in this topic, when we're working on this topic, because it's so personal, but I've certainly learned a lot about it through talking to you. Fantastic. Also, this conciliation. The Germans are so self-critical still about the way they remember, and they're always having arguments about the past. That's never stopped.
Yes.
They always think they could do it better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the word conciliation doesn't come up very often. in the kind of area I work in. It's all about, how we can do things better, how we can remember better, how we can improve the way we, which groups are we not managing to remember properly, and so on and so forth. And there are others who would say you would be more cynical than that, but I do see the Germans overall very positively and think they do make a great effort to remember the past, and maybe they can't be reconciled with themselves.
Yeah. I think you have a very hands-on view of it, living there and everything. When you have German friends and you go deep in friendship, it really reveals these things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I find the same. Yeah, definitely. I don't want to go on too much about that, but
it's interesting. I to pick up on that. Then how is it telling your story to close friends as opposed to people that you don't even know?
Yeah. Well, sometimes the friendship develops through this. Thinking about, were you thinking particularly of Germans or just? like one example is I mentioned in the book Maria. They were next door neighbors. Well, Maria, there were a whole group of friendships that developed with survivors in Gimun. There was Maria and her husband Dieter. There was Willy Kruf and his wife Anna Marie. And then there was Lisbeth, the living maid. But something that was very interesting to me, I think we went very deep because there were these connections to the past. Mm. But my desire in friendships, really, from those people, first of all, my desire was if I could learn anything about my parents, because I didn't know very much about them. And I just felt like with Maria's mother, when she was still alive, she really knew them. But this is an interesting thing. I would get into conversation and I would try to have the conversation go so that they would start talking about their experiences with my parents. But it didn't take 1 second until they got into their own pain. I think it opened my eyes to how Germans felt about their complicity, even if they weren't. Like in Maria's case, she wasn't even alive then. But they would start recounting all the horrible things that happened to them.
Yeah.
Now, in a way, that meant that I didn't really get as much information as I would have liked. But, it really took us very deep with one another because they felt he was a person that they could unload all that stuff on. And you see, it was unresolved for them. Yeah. It was unresolved. And just the act of telling it was a little bit enlightening. So I think the friendship deepened because of that, It's interesting. And I know that, for instance, with Willie, it was so important for him, this reconnection.
Yeah.
Very important.
I think it's interesting in terms of thinking about testimony in terms of, like, I've never really thought of this before, but survivors going, not necessarily to interview people, but to have these conversations with, the lady who was the living maid and lots of the people that you've spoken about, to find more information about not only their story, but the wider family story, and especially, like you said, the parents' story. I've never really thought about survivors. I've thought about survivors doing research, to find out about their family's past, but never conducting conversations to draw out more information. And I think that's something really interesting with what you were saying there. I just thought, no, it's not about going to the archives all the time. It is about having these personal conversations and what they bring.
Yeah. I think that's also a peculiarity of the age at which I left Germany. You see, I'm very interested in kind of reading the stories and hearing the stories of Jewish survivors who, say, left at 15 or 16, because they have a much clearer understanding of what was going on and somewhat more about their parents. And so I think the fact that I was 7 with so little real understanding, that's what drove me into this. So I think that was such an awful thing that I had that loss at 7. But at the same time, that is what has produced these relationships.
Just say, when Hanna was talking there about talking to people and how Germans wanted to tell you their stories and what they'd been through and the pain, and they felt they wanted to talk to you about it, particularly to you. And I found that well, I lived in Munich for several years, and I had a kind of literature course that I did together with a number of others, and um, it was only after about 6 years of this literature course that I told them that I was writing about the expulsion and the flight of Germans at the end of the war, what they'd been through, you know, the Germans that were expelled from Poland and Czechoslovakia and so on. And virtually every one of the women told me that either they had been expelled or their mothers or their fathers had been expelled. And I said, well, why have you never told me about this before? And they said, well, you never asked. That was the first thing. And the second thing they said was, well, we feel we can't talk about it because of our guilt, because of the guilt of what our nation did. The guilt had made them feel silent, made them fall silent. And I think for me, it felt to me they could then talk, and they felt I could talk. I would listen to it, and I wouldn't judge them. I wouldn't say, you know, what another German might say. As someone who was outside, in a way, I would react differently. But I had the same experience that people kind of opened up to me about the pain that they still felt. So I can sympathise with that.
I think that's such a significant thing that happened there. And, you know, that is so true, because people can tell you, but they probably even couldn't tell one another.
Yeah.
Because I found I wanted people to get together. That was my desire. But they were kind of attached to having told the story to me, you know, but they couldn't move. You know, that there's this awful separation. It's very hard to be vulnerable with one another.
Yeah, that's very true. I wonder if making me wonder now if they'd ever talk to each other about it. I don't know if they did. I just remember them all coming out with these stories, and I was sitting there one after the other, me too, or my father or my mother, and but I don't know if they'd ever talked to each other about it before that.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thought. You know, there'd be such a potential there for sharing experiences, but they couldn't do it. It took you to come along, or it took
for you.
It's amazing. Gosh. Oh dear.
There's always, I just find with these conversations that we have, there's always so much I take away from them, and I know everybody else does. It really makes you think in so many other things that you hadn't thought about before. I'm always learning from Hannah. I love our conversation.
I can understand that.
Well, you're very stimulating, both of you. But have we helped you with your assignment, Amy?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, I have enough to write.